Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next Vera webinar, DLP and CASB aren't enough, building a better model for data security. Looks like we've got a full house here online. My name is Grant Shirk. I'm the head of marketing at Vera, and I'll be hosting the conversation today. Before we get started, I wanted to spend one quick minute on just some housekeeping and overall logistics. In general, my goal today is to get us out of here in about 40 minutes. So hopefully a quick conversation, get to a quick demonstration of some of the concepts that we are talking about, and then ultimately open up the floor for questions and answers. Along the way, there are a couple tools that you can take advantage of. They're at the bottom of your screen. If you are having any challenges with audio, video, or anything else, please use the chat function. That will help me and my team identify your problem, get you back up and running as quickly as possible. And then if you do have questions along the way, there's also a Q&A tab in there which will help us keep everything organized and make sure that we get to your question. We will try to handle most of them at the end of the conversation just to make sure we catch them all. But if we do see key questions or comments in the middle of the discussion, I might jump in on a few and bring them up as they're relevant. With that said, I think we are all set, and please let me know how we do at the end. Would love your feedback. So again, our topic today is information security and data protection, and specifically protecting the information that matters most to our organization. For us, this is a common challenge across all of our customers, whether they are in manufacturing, media and entertainment, financial services, or even industries as far as wide as biotech, consulting, and even in a few cases, product design. And I think there's a number of themes we're going to touch on today. Certainly, we're all struggling with the fact that the new ways that we are working and collaborating together create new vectors for data loss. And there is a very noisy ecosystem of potential solutions that can help with that. And we want to cut through some of the noise in there and provide some more practical solutions. That challenge is created by the fact that a lot of the security technologies that we've invested in have really perimeter focused, and we'll talk about some of the issues that comes with. And then hopefully that gets us to a conversation about a better model for thinking about data directly and how that helps us improve our defense in depth around our information security programs. And then ultimately what that will then allow us to do is to talk about what data-centric security looks like in action. And so that's our agenda for today. If there are other topics you'd like to touch on, can definitely dive into those. And I did see one question come in already about, will this be recorded? We are recording now, which is why I'm very nervous about misspeaking or saying too many times, because these kinds of things live on forever. But let's jump straight into that from where we're at today. There was to put this into context, there was a very interesting survey and report that was published just a few weeks ago by a number of security vendors and in the information security community in LinkedIn. And what really boiled to the top for me was that while many more industries and many more organizations are moving directly to cloud platforms for core workloads, for collaboration, for communication, there are still some classic data security challenges that are at the top of every security professional's mind. And if you look at it, they really broke down into these top three. So almost 60% of those folks surveyed in this report identified that their biggest concern about allowing their teams to work more collaboratively in the cloud was really still protecting against data loss. It's a big issue and I feel like a lack of control over this information. There's also an almost equal amount of concern around data privacy. How do we make sure that our responsibility for our customers' data, for our employees' data, is now a shared responsibility with the cloud and SaaS platforms that we choose to? And how do we manage not only the threats to that privacy, but manage accountability in that shared ownership model? It's just a big conversation that I think we're still kind of working through. And then, of course, there's always the concern about breaches of confidentiality. I think a lot of the cloud challenges, certainly a lot of these cloud platforms provide a huge benefit when it comes to the availability of data. But when we look at confidentiality and integrity, particularly when it comes to that information that we're sharing with third-party vendors, these are really key critical challenges. The reason that I think that these are still top of mind, even as we make this platform shift, is there's a large number of factors that are making these three areas around data loss, privacy management, and confidentiality so critical. The first is, of course, and the most obvious, is that we're dealing with the problem of data everywhere. It's no longer tenable to recognize or to think of our organization as a number of managed devices sitting on a managed network within a perimeter that we control. Information by its nature and by the way we do business needs to be shared very fluidly across the organization, and even more so externally to the organization. And I think that's where a lot of our conversation threads are going to lead today, is how do we keep control over our information that we have to share externally in order to get our jobs done? And to that point is where I think we see a lot of the conversation around the quote unquote failure of perimeter security. I'm not here to say that you should throw out your DLP and throw out your firewall. Those are critical components to our infrastructure. But as we seek to build greater defense and depth around information, we have to think beyond the firewall and think beyond the gates that we've set up around our organization in order to maintain our stewardship over our data. Certainly, the challenges of doing this in our third column here have been quantified very clearly for us. Everybody's talking about GDPR, even in the United States. It's a bit of a buzzword in security and privacy more than anything today. But for our conversation, the reason that those regulations and the industry-specific ones like the New York Department of Financial Services, they are quantifying the impact of these kinds of data loss. It's very, very important that we understand exactly what these risks mean to the business, and really where some of these regulations are expanding the scope of what they expect from organizations to protect the encryption, access control, and audit around that data, whether it sits on a system we control or if it's moved beyond that system. And then, of course, we have the issue of those persistent attacks on IP that are happening anywhere and everywhere. If you're talking about trade secrets in manufacturing, if you think about insiders who are taking information with them when they travel, these are real key challenges that the collaborative environment that we work in really only exacerbates. And I think that that's the core idea here, and the reason that we're having this conversation is that in the past, it was very, very effective and very advantageous to think about these concentric circles of control around an organization. You put your identity and authentication, your identity management tools, your access management to applications and services that you manage. You wrap them in a layer of traditional data loss prevention, either on the endpoint or at the network, to do that best guess capture of what information should we allow to leave versus not. And then you package that all up in the firewall, which is going to prevent you against a lot of those inbound attacks on data. The challenge is the modern stresses of business require us to punch a lot of holes in those perimeters, whether they are cloud platforms that we are building new applications in, if they're things like Box and Dropbox and OneDrive, where we are intentionally sharing information with customers and partners, or even just the good old-fashioned email. I mean, I think something like 70% of all intellectual property at some point is shared via email, which is the ideal escape vector for a lot of information. And then when you tie that into employees taking information with them, information that at some point in time they do have access to in a valid way, really helps to accelerate the loss of information outside of the organization. I like to say that we've oversolved the problem of collaboration in many situations, and that just creates new challenges. I think the issue that we're facing is that because of these dynamics, the different challenges that we face as security professionals and IT pros, and the way we have to enable the business to work is we've got to shift the way we think about these problems. Today, if I were to describe the way most organizations deal with information security is, and this isn't necessarily the desired state, but this is where we are, is we tend to be very reactive to new challenges. This is very much the thumb in the dike model where, oh, we had a breach, we had an incident, I need to go identify what happened, do the root cause analysis on that, and then patch that hole, and then move on to the next one. In many cases, our approach to controlling information has been to limit the number of channels or limit the number of tools. Think of a restrictive approach to how we work and how we share information. It's how we get that bad moniker of the Department of No many times. Oftentimes, we're also segregating systems and access, whereas certain teams have access to certain tools and other departments don't. In many cases, it's good to limit scope, kind of that least privileged model, but at the same time, it does introduce friction into how we work. We've talked quite a bit about the perimeter-based model. And I think what all of these flow down to is we have spent a lot of time over the last 5 to 10 years focusing on the concept of managing possession of data, where possession is assumed to be equivalent to access or utilization. And I think I would argue that that is the really big shift that we have to make. If we can move to a new model, if we can find a way that can help us be more proactive about how we address information security, particularly confidentiality and integrity, we can get out in front of the next new app, the next new paradigm, the next new challenge. It allows us to be a lot more enabling of the business. We work with a lot of customers. Some of our early adopters here have really taken the stance of embracing the business and finding ways that they can help them continue to do what they're doing, but add that ability to control and protect information within those tools. Taking a more integrated approach, not thinking about applications and services and silos, but looking at data security as more of a fabric that ties a lot of these apps together. And then ultimately what that means is instead of focusing on the perimeter as the core point of defense, it becomes a lot more data-centric, focusing on the individual assets, objects, and data points that are flowing across the organization. If you can accomplish these 4 things, and they're going to be slightly different for every business, but if you can get to this point, you've moved to a model where you're no longer concerned about possession of information. Simply having a file or having a set of data is not sufficient to grant access. If you're focused on access, who can access the information, what they can do with it, you become a lot more flexible and a lot more capable of preventing a lot of the breaches that we've seen lately. Just having access to a file any longer, just having possession of it no longer equals access. And I think we're seeing that as the dominant theme that's emerging with a lot of customers, is they've recognized that what they're really trying to protect, they're not trying to protect the perimeter, they're trying to protect the data. They're not trying to, that focusing on possession is a bit of a losing battle. It's like playing whack-a-mole. But if they can control access to that information wherever it resides and whatever system it's in, they have a lot better control over what's happening with information, and they have a lot better reportability and auditability over how that information is being used. And it's that idea of data protection through the last mile that is so critical to making this turn in your organization. The timing of this is great. I think many of you may have seen our announcement earlier this week with Netscope, where we're working with one of the top CASB providers to address this challenge of protection through the last mile, working together with these tools that are very, very good at inspecting content, identifying user behavior, and then taking an action on information. But using a platform like Vera to then protect that information, dynamically adjust and update those access controls, and ensure that even after that information moves out of a sanctioned system, persist that protection over time. This is going to ensure that not only are employees and partners using sanction tools and identifying sensitive information where it rests, but then ensuring that you keep control over that information, even if it makes it to an unmanaged device on an unknown network, or even is being shared by a third party externally. The ability to proactively limit exactly who should and who should not have access to that information. And I think that's an incredibly valuable process to think through and capability to have as an organization. We really don't want to have to draw these sort of arbitrary lines in the sand, particularly with cloud platforms that say when and where does our control start and end. And so if you can think about this, taking a data-centric approach to information, it gives you the ability to really think about the entire life cycle of information. It gives you the ability to identify sensitive content in line as it's being created and as it's being transmitted across different platforms in your organization. It also allows you to discover and identify content that has been created out of band. Maybe if you were in education and you're collecting student data that you have to align to FERPA regulations for student privacy, the ability to identify it, but then take action, not just monitor it or flag it or quarantine it, but say, you know what, this is sensitive information. I'm going to directly apply encryption, access control, and policy to determine who can and cannot access that information and how, at the moment it is most important to do so, when it's created or when it's shared. But then over time, this is not a point in time kind of problem, because we know data has really high velocity in the organization today. We need that ability to dynamically track access and update permissions. Some great examples of that: when an individual leaves the finance department and moves over into marketing to be part of their planning team, we need to take her access from financial information or material non-public information and shut it off, but give her access to strategic marketing content. Or perhaps if I am in an M&A process and I need to shortlist the parties that I'm working with, I may have shared a ton of information with a broad swath of people in order to get to this point. But now I need to make sure that that sensitive financial intelligence information is only accessible by the people I'm moving forward with. It's that dynamic nature of collaboration where you really need that last mile protection. And that's where this works together. And that's also why we really strongly believe here that the future of information security is data-centric. And there are really 6 key criteria when I think about data-centric security. It's that ability to not only encrypt data at rest and in transit, but also while it's in use on a managed device or an unmanaged device. The ability to dynamically apply and update classification and labeling, either at the point of creation or as your requirements and needs around that data change. This is also a critical capability for things like GDPR and the Department of Financial Services, because you need to be able to update consent and access over time and prove how you've done it. It should go without saying that this kind of protection has to work anywhere, regardless of storage or the device. And it's not just the ability to restrict access to information, but the ability to gain access to data when you should have it, without requiring a lot of complex downloads, plugins, or installs to make it work. We need to smooth out collaboration overall. It's got to be automated and transparent. We have to make sure that we're not depending on individual people in the organization to make perfect decisions every time. So using what you know about the content in order to apply policy and update that over time will scale your ability to scale security across the organization. It's got to work across modern SaaS and custom legacy business applications. And at the end of the day, what's going to matter most, not only to you, but to your compliance and risk team, is your ability to audit, track, and update that information over time as your business needs change. I think if we think about this, that idea of moving from perimeter-centric to data-centric, moving from the idea of focusing on possession to focus on access, and using these criteria, there is a data-centric model in here that's going to work for most organizations, whether you have 100 employees or if you have 100,000. employees. And this, kind of to illustrate and to wrap up, this is that transition we have to make, and this is where Vera plays in this conversation. We've always focused on this idea of possession and perimeter as we look at the security at the network level, the app level, and the device and the platform. But ultimately, as we've said, what we're really trying to do is protect the data. And the issue is when the data leaves that security perimeter, all bets are off. Vera's role in this is we can take and inherit those access controls and permissions that you set up to protect that data in the first place, apply them directly to these individual data objects, whether it's content, whether it's data, or whether it's communication, and persist that protection and control over time and maintain that link back, which ultimately is going to allow you to spread your ability to protect information absolutely anywhere it travels. Now, there's some more detail here, and by collapsing those protections down to the level of these individual files and other data objects, we really give you 3 layers of protection. And I think this is what has brought customers like Celanese and JBT and even General Electric to the platform, is it's the ability to not only encrypt any kind of information, beyond Office files and PDFs to rich images and media, video, audio, CAD files and drawings and engineering, and even specialized proprietary file types that might be specific to your organization. Ensure that you have the ability to protect that information at rest on absolutely any device. The next layer is to enforce access control to that information. Make sure that proactively I am determining, is this company only? Is this finance only? Should Grant be the only person who can access this information? And being able to update that control list in real time is incredibly valuable. Those first 2 things really cover the problems of protection of data at rest and in transit, but we also know that to be truly data-centric, we've got to go one step further and apply what we call dynamic data protection to these files. And that's the ability to control at any period in time, at any point in time, what someone with access can do with content. And that's everything from traditional information rights management. Can I edit? Can I save a copy? Can I work with this information? Can I print it? To data loss capabilities. Can I restrict screenshots? Can I put a watermark on the content? Can I restrict someone's ability to copy and paste sensitive information out of a file? All the way down to more data management or records management capabilities to embargo or expire content after a specific period of time. If you do this and think about these 3 levels of content, not only does it build a data-centric model that is much stronger in depth. We all know this is security. I'm not going to say here that this is the perfect solution for everything, but it's definitely going to improve your ability to control data as it travels, but do it in a way, because we're focused on the data and not the application, that has the least impact to your end users. We really want to make sure that that experience of working with secure content is almost identical to working with an unsecured file, because we know if you introduce friction into collaboration, people are going to go somewhere else, and we have to avoid that. If you can take this approach, and with Vera, what our customers have found is not only are they securing more information across more teams in the organization, they're starting to become enablers of the business and really allowing different teams to work in their preferred tools without putting unnecessary restrictions upon them, or even worse, having the security tools and programs they put in place ignored because they don't match workflow. Really, really critical to drive both better security awareness and security adherence across the organization. Because we're looking at activities around the data level, we're also providing a much richer view of what's happening with content, both inside your organization and beyond your organization. And the ability to track and audit absolutely every interaction with information is incredibly valuable. And that can be pushed into your SOC or your SIM to make sure that you're getting a better picture of what's happening with your information across the entire ecosystem that you work with. And then, of course, we don't want to be just another solution that's going to point at a problem and say, you should go fix that over there. Because we have and persist control over the information, we give you the ability to actually take action, update permissions and access, and dramatically reduce your exposure if you are concerned that something is at risk. And I think it's that dynamic control that is incredibly valuable, because conditions change. I could be working with a third-party contractor 1 week, but that contract could end. Their business need to access certain information can change. And I have the ability to lock that down, restrict access, or even transition ownership of content away from a third party without having to reissue files, without having to worry that I've lost something along the way. And if someone ever comes back to ask, well, hey, were you able to get that information back? You have the audit trail to prove that absolutely they don't have it anymore. So at this point, we're right on schedule here. We've got about 10 minutes left and the time that we had planned. I'm going to quickly look and see if we have any questions right now. And then what I'm going to do is move over into a quick demonstration of what this looks like in process. So as we look at this here, got a couple coming in. So first question that actually this one just came in, so thank you, this is very timely, is what about knowing when new information is created in the cloud, kind of that moment of creation when new information is created? There's a couple ways you can go about that. Certainly, a good data-centric platform is going to be watching and keeping an eye on what is happening in these different repositories that you can control. You can do that directly with Vera, looking for when certain employees, certain groups, or certain content types are uploaded into cloud repositories and take action at that point. And that's actually the benefit of data-centric solutions like Vera is, because, and we'll show this in a minute, because the protection is so seamless to the end user, they don't have to think about it. And it's not going to impact their ability to work with their information, but you're going to start seeing what's happening. You can get richer levels of control with this CASB integration, whether it's with Netskope or somebody else, because they're actually watching inline and out-of-band traffic to those services, and they can provide the alerts and notifications to you. They're going to let you know when information is created. Sometimes there's going to be a delay on that if it comes up from an unmanaged device, but that is definitely a capability that is available. And again, that's going to vary a little bit on the platform that you choose. One other question here. Quick question: is Netskope the only CASB that Vera works with? No, we have an open platform that makes it possible for you to initiate these actions, whether you're using a legacy DLP like a semantic Vontu or even a digital guardian, and use Vera as an action to secure content. But I mentioned Netskope specifically because of our new partnership with them. It's one of our smoothest and cleanest integrations. Okay, awesome. Thank you for those. We've got a couple more that we will collect at the end, and if you do have questions, please put them into Q&A as opposed to chat. That makes sure I see them much more effectively. What I have here on my desktop is a shared cloud service. This happens to be Dropbox, but it could be truly anything. And as my colleagues have uploaded information into these different folders, Vera is automatically making the decision about how to secure that information, who should have access to it, and what level of access they should have. The great thing about that is it's fully automated. My colleagues don't have to know or don't have to make an explicit decision every time. They're just sharing information the way that they always have. So let's jump into the finance folder here. As you can see, I am working with Word files, videos, images, spreadsheets, in many cases CAD drawings, but I'm not seeing anything that is different from what I would expect. I have my familiar file types here. I get a small indicator that something is secure by Vera, which is great. That increases awareness. But at the end of the day, if I want to come in here and work on this financial statement, all I'm doing is double-clicking that document. It is opening directly in its native application, and I can get on with my analysis. In that half second it took to launch the file in Excel, Vera has done 3 things silently in the background. First, it has checked to make sure that I am of a valid authentication session with my Active Directory service or my SAML service, and I am who I say I am and I'm valid. Second, based on that identity, do I have access to this file? Yes or no? That's that access control we talked about. And here, yes, I do have access to the content, which is great. And then third, what are my specific permissions at this point in time to work with this content? And that is represented for me here very quickly in the Vera policy bar in the lower right-hand corner. And that shows me as an end user, one, hey, you're working with secure content. Please treat it appropriately. That's that awareness that we talked about. And then a quick glance of what my actual permissions with this file are. You don't want completely invisible security. That doesn't help you, because inevitably what's going to happen is you're going to frustrate users because they're going to be surprised by restrictions. You want to be upfront with that. You want to show them what's possible. And so here, because this is an Excel file, they're not changing anything about your content, I can work directly with this information. I can commit changes to the file. But if I try to do things, for example, like print content or copy and paste information out of the document, I'm going to see that there are restrictions applied. So in this case, I can work with this content inside the Excel spreadsheet. But if I try to take it to an email or a notepad, that's going to be blocked. We're going to prevent the exfiltration of data from within the file. And the great thing is that works on any kind of content, and I'm going to see those activities. And that's where kind of that tracking, auditing, and control really come into play. So if I switch us over here and I look at my admin console, so going from a user point of view to an administrative or a management point of view, we are taking all of that information off of these files, off of this content, and flowing it up so we can see across the organization what's happening in my company. What kind of content am I securing? Who is accessing it and where? And what kind of access attempts or anomalies am I seeing in the organization? You can consume it directly here, or again, if you have a SOC or a SIM tool that you use, this is great data to enhance what you're already monitoring. But what I want to do today is take a look at that file that I was just interacting with, that financial statement. Again, this is that Excel file. And with Vera, I can get a full history and view of everything that has ever happened to that content. I can see who created the file in the first place and when. I can see how often it has been used and by whom. And I can even see the sum total of absolutely everyone who has access to that content, how it was granted, and what level of permission that they have. And you can see that many of these were granted automatically when that file was shared through Dropbox, which is great. Behind this sits a full activity log of everything that has happened. I can actually see while I was working here for my demo, I was trying to copy and paste and had that denied. I had the file open for about 2 minutes while I talked to you, which means I'm talking too much. And I can even see that one of my teammates came in and was working with that file in the middle of my demo. So this is truly a collaborative situation. And then I can even see around the world where those accesses to information are occurring, both successful and unsuccessful. So I can get a sense of where are people accessing my information and what are they doing with it. This is incredibly powerful even when it just comes to tracking how information is being used. But then you take it one step further and understand that now for any one of the 25 or so people, groups, and domains who have access to this specific content, I have the ability to either automatically change how that file is going to behave or fully revoke access. So I could come in and for an individual user, I could add a watermark. I could make that file view only. Or in a more, if I wanted to be even more restrictive or reactive, I could come in and completely revoke access to that file. And what that means is, without having to reissue the content, touch that file at all, no matter where it's stored on a managed device or an unmanaged device, if that user comes in and again tries to access that content that I have locally on my machine, I'm going to get a very different experience. We are no longer going to permit that content to be accessed. This is really critical capability, and to do it in kind of a seamless way is going to allow you to really make that shift from a reactive possession-focused security model to a more data-centric, proactive, and access-focused model overall. So that's what I wanted to focus on with you today. At this point, let's jump back in and see what kind of questions that we have coming across. If you give me a second to open up my QA panel. All right, so the first question, yep, there we go, yep. So this one just came in. What happens if someone is working with a protected spreadsheet, but they want to open it in a different application, maybe a Mac-specific file or something in the cloud? And that's going to come down to what you allow that individual to do. You may want to give them the ability to move it beyond that target application and manipulate it elsewhere. Or, because of the kind of sensitive information is, you may want to control exactly how it can be used. So with our policy model, you actually have the ability to determine what happens with that content after they've accessed it in the first place. You can control it, or you can cede control based on your business use case. All right, good. That was a good one. Next one. Yes. Okay. So we're kind of talking about this in the context of perimeter and endpoint solutions, whether it be a CASB or maybe something like a Zscaler. A lot of those solutions are really focused on access to applications and access to services. So what they'll do is they'll sit on a managed network or a managed device, and they will try to reroute traffic or control traffic to specific endpoints, whether it's on-premises systems or cloud systems, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, Amazon, you name it. Unfortunately, where those protections stop is once the content is approved at that point to make it to that service, or if the user is approved to get to that service. What they're not going to see is unmanaged devices accessing those services, or what happens to content that is downloaded out of those services from an approved or a public link. Where Vera is going to step in is ensure that no matter what happens to that content, where it's stored, what kind of device is accessed from, you're going to persist control over it over time. Happy I'll follow up with you on that one afterwards to make sure I'm answering the right question. But again, you've got to think that a lot of these services are moving away from, well, they're thinking about access control to apps and services. We're thinking about access to what you're trying to protect most, which is that data. All right, let's see what else we've got here. Next one is, what about email? Okay, yeah, email is a really good one. In that, we talked about that as one of those primary egress points that we created for information. And there are two ways to think about this. There's definitely the attachments and the IP that are sent out through email. Vera and a data-centric approach are absolutely a great solution to capture that. Either as people know they are sending sensitive information outside of the organization, or automatically. If I have emails leaving my legal team or my compliance team, I automatically want to secure that content as it travels. And also, this extends to the body of the message. We've seen a large number of breaches. Actually, the recent Anthem breach was the result of a third-party contractor sending account information in an email that they shouldn't have sent outside of the organization. Vera, we actually have our product in beta for that right now, but the ability to protect not only the body of the message, but the attachments as well. Let me see. Next one is, what about offline access, right? So we've talked a lot about connected environments and connected worlds. This is very similar to the answer I gave earlier about Zscaler and some of these other tools. Is Vera gives you the choice to manage how that works. So again, by policy, by user group or domain, you can actually determine whether or not an individual does have access to that content offline. Certainly, I think of it as the executive on an airplane scenario. There's definitely a lot of files that are sensitive, that are valuable to be accessed in an offline scenario, but you do want a regular checkup to make sure that the identity or the device that's accessing that information is still trusted. And so we give you the ability to say, yes, we can access the sensitive content offline. We can make that happen whether or not that user has ever opened that file before, but control how that's going to matter. Now, same scenario, if you have company financials, material non-public information, we all know that people are not as good with screen protectors on airplanes as they should be. So you might even want to say, you know what? Yeah, I know you want to work with that on an airplane, but I can't have you accessing that information in a public place because too many people have cell phones, too many people can see that data. I'm not going to let you see that in an air-gapped scenario. I want to be able to control that. And we really give you that choice. Okay, good. So let's see. We are right up on the time we wanted to spend today. I think I got to all of the questions. If I didn't get a chance to do that, my apologies. I will follow up with you from the chat log offline. But in the meantime, would love to continue this conversation with you in a second conversation. If you would like to get in touch, you can always get me at grant@vera.com or online on Twitter at Grant Shirk. And I really appreciate the time and the questions this morning. I hope this was valuable. So thanks to everyone. Good luck with the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Thank you very much.